Fact number 1. In the year 1550 before the Common Era, somewhere in the green floodplains of the Nile, a scribe pressed a reed pen into papyrus and began to list the remedies of his people. That scroll, unrolled again in the 19th century by the German scholar Georg Ebers, is now called the Ebers Papyrus. It stretches more than 20 meters when laid flat, a ribbon of brown fiber covered in careful hieratic script. The papyrus contains more than 700 remedies, arranged by the part of the body they were meant to treat: the eye, the belly, the head, the limbs.
Within its columns, one finds recipes for burns, recipes for coughs, recipes for melancholy, recipes for the mysterious pains that arrive at night and leave before sunrise. The author, whoever he was, wrote with the steady tone of someone who had watched many bodies fail and many bodies recover and no longer expected the world to explain itself. It is a strange comfort to know that someone 3,500 years ago took the time to write down what might ease a headache. Their name is gone. Their hand is gone. The ink has faded to the color of old tea.
Yet the impulse to care, to record, to pass something useful forward into a future they could not see, remains, pressed gently into the fiber of a river plant. Fact number 2. Long before Hippocrates was born, before Greece had written its first medical treatise, Egypt remembered a man named Imhotep. He lived in the 27th century before the Common Era, during the reign of the pharaoh Djoser. He was an architect, a high priest, a scribe, and according to the stories collected centuries after his death, the first physician whose name we still know. Imhotep designed the step pyramid at Saqqara, the oldest large stone building in the world. But it was not his stonework that earned him godhood.
2,000 years after his death, the Egyptians elevated him to the status of a healing deity. Sick pilgrims slept in his temples, hoping that the long-dead architect would walk into their dreams and prescribe a remedy. It is one of the few times in human history that a real man remembered by name became a god of medicine. There is a quiet humility in this story. Imhotep did not claim to be divine. He simply did his work carefully, and the carefulness itself, remembered long enough, became sacred. Most of us will not be remembered at all, but somewhere in the long patience of human memory, the ones who tried to help are remembered the longest. Fact number 3. The Egyptians treated wounds with honey. This was not folklore. It was considered official medicine, documented in the Edwin Smith Papyrus, an even older scroll than the Ebers, dated to roughly 1600 before the Common Era but copied from texts that may be 1,000 years older still. The papyrus lists injuries, examines them in careful order, and prescribes honey for many of them, sometimes mixed with animal fat, sometimes with lint, sometimes applied alone. Modern chemistry has since confirmed what the Egyptians knew by patience alone. Honey draws water out of bacteria. It contains enzymes that produce small amounts of hydrogen peroxide. Its sugar concentration is so high that most microbes cannot survive in it. In the long ward of a modern hospital, medical honey is still used on wounds that refuse to close.
It travels the same road it has traveled for 4,000 years, a road paved by bees and patience and quiet observation. Imagine an Egyptian mother at dusk, smoothing honey onto a child's scraped knee. She does not know the word bacteria. She knows only that the honey helps. That is enough. The knowledge arrives long before the reason does, and the reason, in its slower, more careful way, eventually catches up. Fact number 4. The Egyptians invented a pregnancy test, and it worked. The Berlin Papyrus, dated to around 1400 before the Common Era, describes a procedure in which a woman urinates over seeds of barley and seeds of emmer wheat, carefully planted in the same earth.
If the barley grew, the papyrus says, the child would be a boy. If the emmer grew, the child would be a girl. If neither grew, the woman was not with child. In the 1960s, researchers at the National Institutes of Health, curious and a little skeptical, tested the method. They collected urine from pregnant women and from non-pregnant women and poured it carefully over seeds. The urine of pregnant women made the grains sprout roughly 70% of the time. The urine of non-pregnant women almost never did. The elevated estrogen of pregnancy, it seemed, was nudging the seeds awake. The Egyptians did not know about estrogen. They did not need to. They watched the world carefully, and they trusted what they saw.
The boy or girl part was wishful thinking, but the basic diagnostic was real, 3,500 years before the modern chemistry that would eventually explain it. Fact number 5. In ancient Egypt, willow bark was chewed for fevers and for aches. The remedy appears in the Ebers Papyrus, listed among the treatments for inflammation and swelling. A patient with a painful joint might be told to chew a thin strip of bark, or to drink a bitter decoction of the inner wood and wait. Often, the pain would ease. Inside that bark, though no one in Egypt could have known it, was a chemical called salicin.
In the human body, salicin is slowly converted into salicylic acid, the near cousin of the molecule that, in the late 19th century, the chemists at Bayer would package as aspirin. When an Egyptian laborer chewed willow bark in the shadow of a temple column, he was taking a very early, very raw version of a pill that would one day be sold in every corner of the world. There is something tender in that long chain of hands. The laborer, the priest, the scribe, the medieval monk, the 19th century chemist, the grandmother reaching into her cabinet at 2 in the morning. All of them holding the same small molecule, passed forward across 4,000 years without ever being dropped. Fact number 6.
Egyptian physicians used moldy bread to treat infected wounds. The practice appears in several papyri, casually, as though everyone already knew about it. Take stale bread, allow it to grow blue-green mold, apply it to the wound, and wrap the limb in clean linen. More than 3,000 years later, in a London laboratory in 1928, Alexander Fleming would notice a blue-green mold, penicillium, killing bacteria on a forgotten petri dish. He would name the substance it produced penicillin. He would win the Nobel Prize. The Egyptians had been applying the same family of molds to the same kind of infections since the time of the pyramids. One imagines the small frustration of a future historian looking at these parallel stories. Human beings knew this worked.
They knew it, then forgot it, then rediscovered it, then forgot it again, then rediscovered it once more, and finally, after thousands of years, named it, bottled it, and distributed it to the world. Knowledge moves in long, patient loops. Nothing is ever found only once. Fact number 7. The Egyptians practiced a form of dental care. Tombs have yielded the preserved teeth of priests and pharaohs, some of them wired together with fine gold thread, some filled with a cement of resin and minerals. One preserved lower jaw, now in a Cairo museum, shows 2 teeth joined by a thin golden bridge, set in place long before the occupant was laid into his sarcophagus. It is easy to imagine the patient. An aging official, wealthy, weary, uncomfortable at meals.
A priest of the god Ptah who specializes in teeth and gums. A small bronze instrument carefully shaped. The quiet hours of the procedure. No anesthesia, but perhaps wine, perhaps a paste of poppy. And afterward, the slow relief of being able to chew bread again without weeping. Ancient medicine is often imagined as superstition, wrapped in smoke and amulets. But inside the smoke, people were doing practical, thoughtful work. A patient wanted to eat. A physician wanted to help. The gold thread was not magic. It was the product of a long afternoon, and a steady hand, and the wish to make another person's mouth a place of less sorrow. Fact number 8. Egyptian healers used castor oil, frankincense, and myrrh, often in combination.
Castor oil appears in the Ebers Papyrus as a purgative, a hair tonic, and a lamp fuel. Frankincense and myrrh, the dried resins of desert trees, were burned as incense, applied to wounds, and blended into salves for the skin. Modern studies of these resins have found a surprising array of compounds with antimicrobial and anti-inflammatory effects. Boswellic acid, extracted from frankincense, is being studied in the 21st century for its possible role in the treatment of chronic inflammation. Myrrh is still listed in some pharmacopoeias as a treatment for mouth ulcers. Castor oil is still sold on every continent. A small green bottle in a modern bathroom shelf. A resin-smoked temple in the desert. The distance between them is mostly time. The molecules are the same.
The hopes are the same. The human body, patient and ancient, recognizes its old friends. Fact number 9. The Egyptians kept medical specialists. Herodotus, the Greek historian, visited Egypt in the 5th century before the Common Era, and wrote with evident amazement that every physician in Egypt treated a single disease, and no more. There were, he said, physicians of the eyes, physicians of the head, physicians of the teeth, physicians of the belly, and physicians of unspecified internal disorders. This may have been an exaggeration, but it matches what we find in the papyri. Different scrolls focus on different body systems. Different temple schools trained different kinds of healers. A temple in Heliopolis was especially famous for ophthalmology. A temple in Sais was known for obstetrics.
The specialization was not unlike what one finds in a modern hospital, with its corridors devoted to cardiology, oncology, and neurology. It is humbling to think that 3,000 years ago, someone stood in a dusty courtyard and waited patiently for the eye doctor. The eye doctor came, looked carefully at the patient, and offered what help he could. The world is older and kinder than it often seems. Fact number 10. The Egyptians believed that the heart was the seat of thought and emotion, and that the brain was a kind of useless filling. During the long rituals of mummification, they preserved the heart inside the body with particular care, while the brain was drawn out through the nose with a hooked bronze instrument and discarded.
They were wrong about the brain, of course, but their reverence for the heart produced a strange, accidental accuracy. They understood that the heart was central. They listened for its rhythm, and in the Ebers Papyrus, a physician is instructed to place his hand on the patient, on the wrist, on the neck, on the chest, and count. The heart they wrote, speaks through every limb. Long before Western medicine invented the pulse, the Egyptians were reading it. Sometimes the old stories are wrong about the organ and right about the song. The heart does speak, and we have listened to it ever since.
Fact number 11. The oldest medical text in the world is not Egyptian. It is Sumerian, pressed into a small clay tablet in the city of Nippur, around 2100 before the Common Era. The tablet is the size of a human palm. It contains 15 prescriptions written in cuneiform without a single supernatural reference. No gods, no demons, just plants, minerals, and instructions. The prescriptions call for ingredients such as powdered turtle shell, cassia bark, thyme, figs, and salt, ground together and mixed with milk or beer. The patient is told to wash the afflicted part, apply the paste, and wait. It is the oldest surviving example of a purely empirical medical text, 4,100 years old, older than the pyramids of Giza by several centuries.
The tablet is now held at the University of Pennsylvania. It is small, broken along one edge, brown as old bread, and yet for nearly 4 millennia, a patient forgotten by name was helped, however modestly, by the work of a physician forgotten by name, on the basis of a recipe still legible today. That is a kind of miracle, though the tablet itself does not say so. Fact number 12. In Sumer and later in Babylon, medical practice had 2 parallel branches, which coexisted without apparent conflict. One kind of healer was called the Asu. The Asu worked with herbs, minerals, bandages, and poultices. The other kind was called the Ashipu.
The Ashipu worked with incantations, amulets, and rituals, treating the patient's illness as the work of a demon or a displeased god. A patient might visit both. He might drink the Asu's bitter tea in the morning, and listen to the Ashipu chant at his bedside in the evening, and consider himself well served by both. There is a practical wisdom in this. The Asu addressed the body. The Ashipu addressed the mind. Together, they formed a crude but functional model of care, one that modern medicine is quietly rediscovering under new names, with new words. We sometimes imagine that ancient people were confused about what medicine was. In fact, they understood something that modern hospitals occasionally forget.
A sick person is a body and a fear, and both must be attended to, or neither will heal. Fact number 13. The Babylonians studied the liver. They believed it was the seat of the soul, and they read its surface like a map. Clay models of sheep livers, divided into numbered regions, have been unearthed from royal archives. The diviners would sacrifice a sheep, inspect the liver, and use the marks they found as a guide to treatment, military decisions, and state policy. From our point of view, this is superstition, but it is also, in a sense, the earliest form of pathology. The Babylonians looked inside the body of an animal and asked, "What does this organ tell me?"
Centuries later, Roman and Greek anatomists would ask the same question with scalpels, and eventually modern pathologists would ask it with microscopes. The tool changes. The question stays the same. 1,000 years from now, some of our methods will look like clay sheep livers to our descendants. They will smile at us fondly. They will also understand that we were trying. That is all one can really do.
Fact number 14. The Code of Hammurabi, carved into a tall basalt pillar around 1750 before the Common Era, contains some of the oldest known medical regulations. If a physician operated on a nobleman with a bronze lancet, and the nobleman died, the physician's hand was to be cut off.
If the patient was a slave, the physician owed only the price of the slave. The laws are harsh by modern standards, but they reveal something important. By 1750, before the Common Era, society had already decided that medicine required accountability. The physician was not above judgment. He was a professional, bound by rules, expected to do well, and punished when he did not. The ancestor of the malpractice lawsuit is nearly 4,000 years old. Imagine the Babylonian surgeon, his bronze lancet wrapped in clean linen, walking to the bedside of a nobleman. His hand trembles slightly. He remembers the pillar in the temple square and the law carved on it. He steadies himself. He does his best. Medicine, from its earliest days, has been a trembling art.
Fact number 15. The Assyrian royal library of Ashurbanipal, assembled in the 7th century before the Common Era, contained hundreds of clay tablets on medicine. Excavated in the 19th century from the buried ruins of Nineveh, these tablets describe fevers, rashes, seizures, parasites, and a long list of stomach complaints, each paired with a recommended treatment. Among the ingredients are licorice root, cedar oil, cypress cones, sesame, and curiously, onions, which the tablets insist are sacred. The onion appears in several incantations, peeled layer by layer, while the patient recites a prayer, the layers symbolically carrying the illness away with them. The pungent, tear-producing bulb, humble companion of every kitchen, was once a sacrament.
Even now, in a quiet kitchen somewhere, a tired parent slices an onion for soup and weeps a little, without knowing why. Somewhere in the long genetic memory of the human kitchen, the onion still has a ceremony attached to it. Every meal is in some small way an inheritance. Fact number 16. The Mesopotamians brewed beer, and they believed that beer was medicine. Some of their prescriptions call for medicinal plants to be infused directly into dark beer, which was to be drunk 3 times a day. The alcohol killed certain microbes. The water, which in crowded cities was often dangerous, was made safer by the brewing process. The bitter herbs gave their gifts to the yeast.
For centuries, beer was, in effect, a daily light dose of herbal medicine. Children drank a weaker version called kash, which was often safer than river water. Priests brewed specialty beers for the temples. Physicians prescribed beers for specific symptoms. a Babylonian diagnostic handbook, organized around the 40 tablets of the series known as Sekiku, is the oldest systematic attempt at clinical diagnosis. It was compiled around 700 before the Common Era by the scholar Esagilkin Apli, who worked in the court of a Babylonian king. The text begins with the physician's approach to the patient's house. As he walks, he is to note the signs he sees along the way: a black dog, a snake, a certain cry in the distance. These were considered prognostic signs. Once at the bedside, he is told to look, to listen, and to touch, and to match the findings against the tablets. The book is a striking mixture of superstition and careful observation. Fever, chills, rigor, jaundice, paralysis, seizures.
Each sign has a description. Each description has a prognosis, some of them remarkably accurate. It is the long ancestor of every medical textbook you have ever seen in a doctor's office. It has been passed from hand to hand, rewritten, translated, forgotten, rediscovered, updated, and passed again. The library is older than the pharmacy. The pharmacy is older than the clinic. The clinic is older than the hospital. Each rests on what came before. Fact number 18. The Assyrians developed a treatment for what they called the pounding disease, almost certainly migraine. The prescription, recorded in one of the Nineveh tablets, called for the patient to be anointed with cedar oil, wrapped in wool, and kept in a darkened room.
A paste of certain herbs was applied to the temples. A low chant was spoken, not loudly, but softly, by a priest. Apart from the chant, the advice is essentially what a modern neurologist might suggest: quiet, darkness, warmth, time. The mechanisms were mysterious. The experience of the migraine, however, has not changed. The throbbing behind the eye, the nausea, the sense that every light is a small cruelty, is recognized across 4,000 years of human history, which means, in the kindest sense, that no one has ever suffered a migraine alone. The darkened room is a very old room. It has been quiet for a very long time. Tonight, perhaps, it is quiet for you. Fact number 19.
The Babylonians were deeply afraid of eye disease and developed a detailed array of ophthalmic treatments. The eye, they believed, was the window of the soul, and a wound to it was a wound to the inner life. Prescriptions for cataracts, styes, conjunctivitis, and fluid discharges fill entire tablets. One formula calls for a powder of copper sulfate and zinc oxide mixed with honey, applied to the eyelid with a small bronze rod. Copper and zinc compounds are antimicrobial. Honey, as we have already said, is quietly antibacterial. Honey and mineral drops were prescribed for thousands of years in this region. They almost certainly worked, at least some of the time, well enough to save some vision that would otherwise have been lost.
An old man in Babylon, seated in the late afternoon light, squinting at a carved relief, sees just well enough to trace its contours with his finger. A distant physician's careful hand, pressed into his eye with honey and copper, is part of the reason he can still see. Medicine is often invisible by the time it has succeeded. Fact number 20. The ancient Mesopotamians used a concept they called lipiu, a sort of subtle poison to explain illnesses whose causes they could not see. A person who lost appetite without visible injury or fell ill after eating an ordinary meal was said to carry lipiu in the stomach. The treatment was often to induce vomiting with carefully chosen herbs and then to restore the body with thin grain broths.
They were approaching, in their language, the idea that something invisible and harmful could enter the body. That same intuition would one day become germ theory, some 4,000 years later. Before humans could see microbes, they could guess at their effects. They built systems of healing around a suspicion, and the suspicion turned out, in the end, to be roughly correct. The body knows what it does not yet understand. Medicine is the slow translation of that knowledge into words.
Fact number 21. In the mythic history of China, there is a ruler named Shen Nong, the divine farmer. He is said to have lived some 5,000 years ago at the dawn of agriculture. The legend tells that Shen Nong personally tasted hundreds of plants, carrying a little jade bowl in order to learn which were food, which were medicine, and which were poison. His body, the legend says, was transparent so that he could watch the substances move through him. No such emperor can be proven to have existed. But the text attributed to him, the Shennong Ben Sao Jing, the classic of herbal medicine of Shennong, is very real.
It was compiled around the 2nd century of the Common Era, collecting older knowledge into a single work. It lists 365 substances, one for each day of the year, sorted into 3 categories. The uppermost category were the gentle long-term tonics. The middle were the cures. The lowest were the poisons, used with care. Behind every myth is a crowd of forgotten tasters. Someone tried each plant first. Many of them died. Some wrote down what they had learned. Others whispered the knowledge to their children. Centuries later, a scholar sat in a candlelit room and copied the accumulated whispers onto a fresh scroll. He credited it to the divine farmer because there were too many names to remember, and one name felt kinder.
Fact number 22. The Huangdi Neijing, the Yellow Emperor's inner canon, is the foundational text of Chinese medicine. It was written in stages between the 1st century before the Common Era and the 1st century of the Common Era. It takes the form of a long dialogue between the mythical Yellow Emperor, Huangdi, and his physician Qi Bo. The inner canon does not describe specific prescriptions. It describes a philosophy. The body is a landscape, it says. It has mountains and rivers. It has seasons. It has a subtle energy called qi, which flows through channels called meridians, and which must not be blocked. Disease is disharmony. Healing is the slow work of restoring the natural flow. The physician does not impose a cure.
He restores the conditions for health and then steps back. This is a different metaphor from the one used by Western medicine. It is older and quieter and more patient. It will not win every argument. But even a modern doctor, watching her patient's breathing slow as an infusion begins, has the same thought that Qi Bo would have recognized. The body, left to itself and supported gently, often knows the way home. Fact number 23. Hua Tuo was a physician who lived in the late Han Dynasty in the 2nd and early 3rd century of the Common Era. He is remembered for many things, but most especially for a mysterious herbal anesthetic called mefazon.
Given to the patient before surgery, it rendered him unconscious, allowing abdominal operations that were otherwise unthinkable. The exact recipe for mefazon has been lost. Historians guess that it contained cannabis, datura, aconite, and other plants with sedating or paralyzing properties. It is remarkable, in any case, that 1600 years before the discovery of ether in the West, a surgeon in China was routinely operating on patients who felt nothing. Hua Tuo is said to have performed intestinal surgeries and to have closed the wounds with careful sutures, and to have seen his patients walk home a few weeks later. Hua Tuo was eventually executed, according to tradition, by the warlord Cao Cao, who suspected him of disloyalty.
Before his death, the physician is said to have burned his remaining manuscripts. An unknown amount of medical knowledge vanished in that single fire. Medicine is often carried by one person at a time, and one person at a time is a fragile way to carry anything. Fact number 24. Acupuncture, the art of treating illness by inserting fine needles into specific points of the body, is first clearly described in the Yellow Emperor's inner canon. The oldest surgical needles found in China, unearthed from a Han dynasty tomb, are made of gold and silver, and are slender enough to slip between skin and muscle without drawing blood.
In the ancient tradition, the body contains hundreds of points arranged along meridians, each associated with an organ or a flow of qi. A skilled acupuncturist, after a careful pulse reading, chooses only a few points and presses the needles in with a patient, deliberate hand. The patient, lying on a simple mat, sometimes falls asleep during the session, dreaming of forests. Modern science has begun cautiously to study acupuncture. It has found, among other things, that needle insertion at certain points alters local blood flow, releases endorphins, and modifies pain signals in the spinal cord. Whether or not meridians exist as the old physicians imagined them, the quiet observation of 2,000 years has uncovered something real. The needles are small. The tradition is very large.
Fact number 25. Moxibustion is the gentler cousin of acupuncture. Small cones of dried mugwort called moxa are burned near the skin, warming specific points without puncturing them. The practice is nearly as old as acupuncture itself, described in the same classical texts, and for a long period in rural China, it was more common than the use of needles. The smell of burning mugwort is sweet and slightly bitter. It fills small clinics in old towns. An elderly woman, lying on her side, feels the warmth flow into her lower back and remembers the kitchen fires of her childhood. The treatment and the memory are not really separate.
They are part of the same long story of humans being warmed by small fires, by attentive hands, by the practiced kindness of other humans. Tonight, you are warm enough. Your hands are resting. Somewhere in a quiet village, a little moxa cone is burning down to nothing. A tiny orange tip, a thin thread of fragrant smoke. Let that image soften in your mind. The fire is small. It is enough. Fact number 26. Traditional Chinese medicine developed an elaborate theory of pulse diagnosis. A skilled physician places 3 fingers on the patient's wrist along the radial artery and listens to the pulse at 3 depths and 6 positions. He is not simply counting beats. He is listening for character. Is the pulse slippery, tense, floating, deep, wiry?
Each quality suggests a different disorder, sometimes very specific ones. It takes years of practice to read a pulse in this way. A master can spend 20 or 30 seconds at the wrist and then describe the patient's sleep, appetite, stress, and digestion in startling detail. Whether or not every claim is literally accurate, the method is a beautiful example of the body telling its own story to a patient listener.
In the dark of this evening,
Perhaps it is enough to remember that a human pulse is a long story, not just a number. Fact number 27. Ginseng was already famous in China 2,000 years ago. The root, shaped sometimes like a small human figure, was called renshin, the man root. It was said to restore the vital energy of the exhausted, to warm the weak, and to prolong life. The wild roots of the northern forests were prized above all others, and the finest were reserved for emperors and their closest ministers. Wars have been fought over ginseng. Poachers have died for it. Entire regions of forest have been cleared of wild plants.
Yet at the center of the story is an old farmer, walking slowly through the woods in autumn, his eyes on the forest floor, looking for a cluster of 5-lobed leaves that might, if he is lucky, hide a root as old as he is. When he finds one, he takes only 1 or 2 and leaves the rest. The forest and the farmer have a long agreement. In its patient, slow way, the ginseng remembers. And we, though our worlds are full of louder things, can sometimes still remember too. Fact number 28. One of the great figures of Chinese medical history is Zhang Zhongjing, a physician of the late 2nd century. He lived through a devastating epidemic that killed 2/3 of his own clan.
In the grief of that loss, he compiled a book, the Shanghan Lun, the treatise on cold damage disorders, which would become one of the most influential medical texts in East Asia. The book is a detailed manual for dealing with fevers of various kinds. Zhang organized illnesses by their pattern of symptoms, the shape of their fever curve, the behavior of the pulse, and the geography of the pain. For each pattern he proposed a specific herbal formula, often containing only a handful of ingredients, designed to correct the imbalance of the body. Nearly 2,000 years later, some of those formulas are still prescribed in pharmacies from Beijing to Kyoto.
A man mourning his family, driven by grief into careful, patient work, wrote a book that helped strangers long after his own voice was gone. That is one of the kinder possibilities of human life. Fact number 29. In the Tang dynasty, a physician named Sun Simiao wrote 2 great medical encyclopedias, known collectively as the Qianjin Yifang, the prescriptions worth 1,000 gold. He was born in the late 6th century and is said to have lived to nearly 140, though the number is almost certainly an embellishment of his students. Sun Simiao was famous for refusing to charge his patients.
He insisted that a physician should treat rich and poor alike, that he should never enter a home with condescension, that he should be willing to travel in snow for a sick child. He wrote a set of ethical rules for doctors that historians have called the Chinese equivalent of the Hippocratic Oath. He was, in his own way, a monk of medicine. In every generation there is a Sun Simiao, someone who chooses the harder road of honesty, who treats the poor as carefully as the rich. Most of them are forgotten. Some, like Sun Simiao, are remembered. The pages they wrote are quietly still present, carried forward by the kinder half of history. Fact number 30. Chinese medicine developed a careful pharmacology of minerals.
Cunabar, realgar, and mercury salts were used in certain preparations, sometimes to dangerous effect. Several emperors are believed to have died of mercury poisoning from elixirs meant to grant them immortality. The first emperor of China, Qin Shi Huang, is one of them. He sent expeditions across the sea in search of the elixir of life. He died at 50, probably of the poison he had hoped would save him. The tragedy of mercury-based elixirs is one of medicine's enduring shadows, but it is also a reminder that human beings have always been willing to risk their lives to live longer.
The pursuit of immortality is older than the pyramids, and it is still with us in subtler forms, in anti-aging creams, in supplements, in longevity podcasts.
The bottle has changed. The thirst is the same. Perhaps the oldest cure for the fear of death is not a potion at all. It is simply a long, quiet night, during which one realizes, without alarm, that one is still here.
Fact number 31. The Charaka Samhita is one of the two great foundational texts of Ayurveda, the ancient medical tradition of India. It was compiled around the 1st century of the Common Era, though its roots reach back much further into the oral traditions of the Vedic period. Attributed to the sage Charaka, whose historical person is lost to us, the text is a comprehensive survey of diseases, diagnoses, and treatments, arranged in 8 books. The Charaka Samhita is striking for its attention to the patient's mind, environment, and daily life. It devotes long passages to the effects of climate, season, diet, and sleep. It describes the qualities of the ideal physician, who should be learned, compassionate, self-possessed, and above all, honest. It does not rush toward the prescription.
It moves slowly toward understanding, and only then offers the medicine. There is a cultural patience in this text that is worth remembering. A good healer, the book suggests, is in no hurry. He listens, he asks, he waits. He observes the morning light falling across the patient's face. Only then does he reach for the small clay jar of medicine. In a world that increasingly asks everything to be faster, the Charaka Samhita remains a long, quiet breath. Fact number 32. The Sushruta Samhita is the other great foundational text of Ayurveda. Attributed to the surgeon Sushruta, who lived perhaps in the 6th century before the Common Era in the ancient city of Kashi, the text describes surgical procedures of astonishing sophistication.
It is by some measures the oldest systematic textbook of surgery in the world. Sushruta lists more than 300 surgical procedures and more than 120 surgical instruments. He describes techniques for removing bladder stones, for setting bone fractures, for delivering babies in difficult positions, and for treating cataracts. His instructions are detailed and practical. Sterilize the instruments by boiling them in water, he says. Tie the patient carefully. Check the light. Work with steady hands. One pictures the surgeon, long before the invention of the modern hospital, kneeling beside a wooden table in the afternoon heat. His instruments lie on a clean cloth. His apprentice stands by, ready. A prayer is whispered. A cut is made. A life, perhaps, is saved.
This has happened in countless rooms, in countless centuries, on countless afternoons. Fact number 33. Sushruta described a procedure for the reconstruction of a severed nose. A flap of skin was cut from the forehead, rotated down, and sutured into the shape of a nose. The technique survived in India for more than 2,000 years, practiced by families of surgeons who passed the skill from father to son. In the 18th century, a British surgeon stationed in India watched an itinerant Indian healer perform this procedure on a man whose nose had been cut off as a punishment. The British surgeon wrote up the case in a medical journal.
Western plastic surgery, which would one day become its own enormous field, was reintroduced in large part from Sushruta's ancient technique, carried forward by villages of unknown surgeons for 25 centuries. The face, in some sense, is the most visible part of a person. To give a stranger back, his face is one of the quieter miracles of medicine. The first hand to do so, in the Indus Valley, holds all the hands that have done so since. Fact number 34. Turmeric was a central remedy of Ayurvedic medicine. The bright yellow powder, made from the dried rhizome of curcuma longa, was used as an anti-inflammatory, a wound dressing, a digestive aid, and a beauty treatment. It stained the fingers of everyone who worked with it.
It dyed the robes of monks. It infused the food of 100 generations. The active compound in turmeric, curcumin, has been studied extensively in the last several decades. It has shown anti-inflammatory and antioxidant effects in many laboratory experiments. Its clinical power is modest and still debated. But as a part of daily food, pressed into rice, mixed into curries, rubbed onto bruises, it has been silently supporting the health of South Asia for thousands of years. There is a warmth in the color of turmeric. It is the color of afternoon light on old stone. Kitchens smell of it. Hands are stained by it. Babies are gently bathed in a paste made from it before their naming ceremonies.
The medicine in such a tradition is not a separate thing. It is the kitchen itself. Fact number 35. Ayurveda organizes the body's constitution around 3 doshas, 3 humoral principles, called Vata, Pitta, and Kapha. Vata is associated with movement and wind, Pitta with transformation and fire, Kapha with structure and water. Each person the system holds has a particular mixture of the 3, and illness arises when the balance is lost. This is a metaphor, of course. It is not molecular biology, but it is a beautiful metaphor built on long observation. Some people are quick, restless, and sensitive to cold. Some are intense, bright, and quick to anger. Some are steady, calm, and slow to change.
A careful Ayurvedic physician asks about sleep, appetite, moods, and menstrual cycles, and then suggests a regimen of diet, rest, and gentle herbs that might restore the patient's inner weather. The body has weather. Modern medicine sometimes forgets this, focusing on discrete organs and isolated numbers. Ayurveda remembers. A wise clinician in any tradition is a kind of weather watcher. You too are weather tonight. Quiet, softening, moving gently towards sleep. Fact number 36. Ashwagandha, Withania somnifera, is one of the most important herbs of Ayurveda. Its Sanskrit name means the smell of a horse, a reference to its strong scent and, according to the tradition, to the strength it was said to confer.
It was prescribed for exhaustion, for insomnia, for weak joints, for mental unease, and for old age. The second part of its Latin name, somnifera, means sleep-bringing. Modern studies have explored ashwagandha's effects on stress, sleep, and thyroid function, with results that are promising but not final. In old Ayurvedic clinics, however, it was simply a steady companion. A small brown powder stirred into warm milk before bed, drunk slowly, and set aside as the eyes grew heavy. Perhaps such a cup is beside you even now, in a distant kitchen somewhere. The practical details do not matter. The gesture of being cared for, of being helped toward rest, is what the herb really is. Fact number 37. Ayurveda described the body as containing a network of 7 sacred tissues, the Saptatatu. They are listed in a specific sequence: plasma, blood, muscle, fat, bone, marrow, reproductive tissue. Each tissue, the tradition says, is formed from the one before. Nutrition passes step by step through the body, becoming finer and finer until at last it becomes ojas, the subtle essence of vitality. The physiology is not modern, but the intuition is striking. The body is a slow cascade of transformations. Food becomes blood, blood becomes flesh, flesh becomes bone. And at the end of the chain, if the cascade is healthy, the body produces something almost invisible, a kind of glow, a steady inner light. Ayurveda called it ojas. Modern medicine does not have a single word for it.
But one recognizes it in certain people. A quiet brightness around the eyes. Sleep, the tradition also said, rebuilds ojas. Each good night's rest restores a little more of the inner light. Tonight you are doing the old work of the body. You are making ojas again. Fact number 38. Oil massage, called abhyanga, was an essential part of daily Ayurvedic practice. Warm sesame oil was rubbed into the skin each morning, or each evening, in long strokes that followed the direction of the hair. The practice was said to soothe vata, to nourish the tissues, to slow aging, and to ease the restlessness of the mind. Modern science has found that topical sesame oil is indeed absorbed into the skin and may have mild antioxidant effects. But even without that justification, the experience itself has an obvious value. The slow, repetitive pressure of a warm hand on the body is profoundly relaxing. Muscles soften. Breath deepens. A person who has been massaged with oil by a patient hand is a person ready for sleep. Perhaps tonight, in your mind, small hands are moving slowly across your shoulders, down the long line of your back, across the soles of your feet. The oil is warm. The room is quiet. You are being cared for a moment, across thousands of years. Fact number 39. Ayurvedic medicine included a ritual called panchakarma, the 5 actions. It was a deep cleansing process, lasting several weeks, in which the patient was gradually prepared with oils and herbs and then subjected to a sequence of gentle purgations, vomiting, purging, enemas, nasal treatments, controlled bleeding. Each step was supervised by a trained physician. The procedure sounds harsh in summary, but it was traditionally practiced on otherwise healthy people in midlife as a form of maintenance, a kind of seasonal reset. The patient was placed under the care of attendants, fed simple foods, massaged, steamed, and allowed to rest. It was both a medical treatment and a retreat. It is worth remembering that ancient cultures often made room for rest in ways that our modern calendars do not. A Roman went to the baths.
A medieval Japanese aristocrat went on pilgrimage. An Ayurvedic patient went to panchakarma. The old world invented many forms of pause. If we have forgotten them, we can at least remember that they were once widely considered necessary. Fact number 40. At the heart of Ayurveda is the idea that health is not merely the absence of disease. The Sanskrit word for health, swastha, literally means to be established in oneself. A healthy person is someone who is quietly at home in his own body, his own mind, his own place in the world. The body is well, the senses are clear, the emotions are balanced, and the soul is calm. This definition is older than most medical definitions we use today. It is unmeasurable but not vague.
A healthy person, by Ayurveda's reckoning, is one who can fall asleep easily, who can wake gently, who can eat without discomfort, and who can sit with himself without urgency. These are simple signs available to anyone who cares to notice them. You may not be perfectly svastha tonight, very few of us are, but as your breath slows, as the world grows quiet, as the small noises of the house become distant, you are, for a moment, established in yourself. That moment is the old definition of health. Let it stay a little longer.
Fact number 41. Hippocrates of Kos was born around 460 before the Common Era, on a small Greek island in the eastern Aegean. He is the figure most often called the father of Western medicine. Little is known about him with certainty. Most of what we have are the Hippocratic corpus, a collection of some 60 treatises, only some of which he may have actually written. The corpus, however, has a consistent spirit. It rejects the idea that diseases are punishments from the gods. It treats illness as a natural phenomenon, arising from natural causes, to be studied through careful observation. It insists that the physician's work is to help the body's own tendency toward healing, not to override it.
This was a revolutionary stance in a culture that had long explained epidemics as the anger of Apollo. Hippocrates walked the low hills of Kos, listened to his patients, took notes on their fevers, and without quite meaning to, set a course for the next 2,000 years of medical thinking. He probably did not know that we would still be speaking his name. He was simply doing what he thought was right, in the afternoon light, on a quiet island. Fact number 42. The Hippocratic Oath is a short, strange, beautiful document. It was composed in its original form sometime around 400 before the Common Era. It begins with an invocation of Apollo, Asclepius, Hygeia, and Panacea. It promises to honor one's teachers as one's own parents.
It promises to give no deadly drug, even if asked. It promises to treat men and women, slaves and freemen, with the same care. Modern oaths have updated the language. Apollo is rarely invoked these days, but the central idea remains. The physician, by the act of taking the oath, steps out of the ordinary world and into a special, constrained relationship with suffering. He binds himself. He accepts the weight of the knowledge he is about to learn. He agrees that the knowledge is not his. It was lent to him by his teachers, and he must lend it forward. Every oath is a small piece of civilization. It is an admission that a human being left alone is sometimes not enough.
The old Greek words, in their half-archaic cadence, are still heard in medical schools today in different languages, under different skies. The oath has traveled far, and so far it has not been broken. Fact number 43. The Hippocratic doctrine of the four humors, blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile, was the dominant theory of European medicine for nearly 2,000 years. Each humor was associated with a season, an organ, an element, and a set of temperaments. Health was the balance of the four. Disease was their disharmony. Modern medicine long since abandoned the theory as scientific description. But as a language for describing temperament, the four humors remain curiously useful. The sanguine person, energetic and optimistic. The phlegmatic person, calm and slow.
The choleric person, sharp and quick to anger. The melancholic person, thoughtful and given to sorrow. These are recognizable types, and Hippocrates' vocabulary still colors our inner lives without our knowing it. Every grand theory is, in the end, replaced by something more precise. But the old theories leave behind shapes. The four humors are gone as biochemistry. They are still here as the faint outlines of character. There is a strange tenderness in the residue of forgotten science. Fact number 44. Hippocrates described the face of a dying person with such precision that his description is still quoted. The nose becomes sharp. The eyes sink into their sockets. The temples collapse. The ears turn cold and shrunken, and the lobes are twisted.
The skin about the forehead is dry, tense, and parched, and the color of the whole face becomes a greenish or black, leaden or livid hue. That description is now known as the Hippocratic face, facies Hippocratica. It is still used in hospitals across the world as a clinical sign. A physician at 3 in the morning, watching a very ill patient, may recognize the face quietly and adjust his care. The careful observation of a man on an island 2,500 years ago is still, in its small, precise way, helping other people today. To describe death with such unsentimental exactness was an act of strange respect. The dying were not to be ignored, even in appearance. They were to be seen and remembered accurately.
Medicine, at its most humane, is often unflinching. It is also, in its own way, very tender. Fact number 45. Hippocrates practiced on the island of Kos at a sanctuary devoted to the healing god Asclepius. Patients came to the island from across the Greek world. They were bathed, fed simple meals, allowed to walk in the sacred groves, and finally led to a long dormitory where they slept and dreamt. The dreams, it was believed, contained the god's prescription. In the morning, a priest interpreted the dream and wrote down the recommended treatment. Sometimes the treatment was a medical one. Sometimes it was a change of diet, a new exercise, a pilgrimage to another shrine. Sometimes it was simply more rest.
The sanctuary combined religion, medicine, and what we might now call psychology, without distinguishing among them. It is one of the earliest forms of the modern hospital. The patient leaves the ordinary world, enters a quiet place, sleeps under the care of attentive strangers, and awakens with some hope of healing. You too, in some sense, are in a kind of quiet sanctuary tonight. The old priests would approve. Fact number 46. Hippocrates is credited with the aphorism, "Life is short, and art is long." Ars longa, vita brevis, in its later Latin form. The full Greek original is longer and more patient. Life is short, the art is long, opportunity fleeting, experience treacherous, judgment difficult. It is a warning to the physician. Do not hurry.
Do not be overconfident. Do not assume. It is also a warning to every thoughtful person. The practice of any worthwhile skill, medicine or otherwise, is long, difficult, and humbling. The years pile up behind you and still there is more to learn. That is not a discouraging thought. It is a quietly freeing one. It is all right to still be a student at any age. The night itself is a kind of student. It rises each evening, sits in its quiet classroom of stars, and practices, very patiently, the old, long art of being dark. You are, in your small way, practicing with it. Fact number 47. Hippocrates strongly advocated a careful diet, individualized for each patient.
He wrote that some foods nourish one person and harm another. He distinguished between light foods and heavy foods, between warming and cooling, between the foods of summer and the foods of winter. He insisted that the physician know his patient's habits at the table as well as at the bedside. This was, in effect, an early form of clinical nutrition. It had no vitamins, no calories, no macronutrients. It had only the slow wisdom of watching people eat and noticing who grew strong and who grew weak. He would have been pleased, perhaps, that modern medicine is beginning to take food seriously again after a long detour. Food has always been part of medicine. It is one of medicine's oldest names. A bowl of soup is a small prescription.
A slice of bread, eaten slowly, is a small prescription. The cup of warm milk before bed that your grandmother made is a prescription that Hippocrates would have recognized. Medicine is wider than the pharmacy. It is at its kindest when it is also the kitchen. Fact number 48. The Hippocratic principle known as primum non nocere, first, do no harm, is often cited as the core of medical ethics. The phrase itself is Latin, and not from Hippocrates directly, but the idea is rooted in the Hippocratic corpus. One of its treatises advises the physician to be of benefit, or at least to do no harm. The principle is deeper than it looks. It acknowledges that medicine is always a trade between effects.
Every powerful treatment can also cause damage. The physician's job is not only to seek cures, but to refuse the cures that would be worse than the disease. Sometimes doing less is the wiser choice. Sometimes watchful waiting, with attentive kindness, is itself the whole treatment. In a world that often mistakes intervention for care, the old instruction is worth remembering. Sometimes the best help is a cup of water, a closed curtain, and the gentle company of someone who will not demand anything of you tonight. Fact number 49. Hippocrates wrote of epilepsy at a time when most people considered it a sacred disease, caused by the direct touch of a god. He disagreed.
In the treatise on the sacred disease, he argued that epilepsy was a natural illness arising from a disturbance in the brain and should be studied and treated as such. This was a remarkable act of intellectual courage. To take a mysterious and frightening phenomenon, beloved by priests and feared by families, and insist that it was neither holy nor demonic, but simply biological, was to move the entire conversation of medicine into a new country. He did not have the tools to prove his point. He had only the stubborn conviction that the body, however strangely it behaved, was still the body. Every age has its sacred diseases, its mysterious ailments draped in superstition.
And every age, if it is patient, eventually finds a quiet doctor who says, "This too is nature, and nature can be studied." It is slow work. It is also very important work. Fact number 50. The school of Cos endured long after Hippocrates himself was gone. For centuries, physicians trained on the island studied his texts and carried the methods out across the Mediterranean. From Kos they went to Alexandria, to Rome, to Constantinople, and later, in translation, to Baghdad and beyond. It is worth pausing over that thread. An old man teaches a young student on a quiet island. The student grows up and teaches others.
But the habit of thought, the commitment to observation, the patience with the body are passed forward in manuscripts and memories. The thread is thin. It does not break. You are, in some small way, at the far end of that thread. Your breath slows. Your thoughts soften. The island of Kos is still warm in the memory of human medicine. Somewhere, a physician in our own time is sitting quietly at the bedside of a stranger, doing what she can, guided by the invisible hand of an old teacher she has never met.
Fact number 51. Claudius Galenus, known to us simply as Galen, was born in the year 129 of the Common Era in the city of Pergamon, in what is now Western Turkey. His father, Elias Nikon, was a wealthy architect and mathematician. Galen received an excellent education in philosophy and rhetoric before turning to medicine, reportedly on the advice of a dream. He would go on to become the most influential physician of the ancient world. His writings fill more surviving volumes than any other author of classical antiquity. His ideas, correct and incorrect, would dominate European medicine for more than 1,000 years. No other doctor, before or since, has cast so long a shadow.
He was ambitious, vain, argumentative, and brilliant, and he never quite stopped writing. It is difficult to imagine him asleep. He seems always to be lecturing, dissecting, or composing. But he too, one assumes, eventually went home in the evening, lay down on a couch, and let the noise of Rome fade. Even the loudest intellects at last are gentled by nightfall. Fact number 52. Galen began his medical career as a physician to the gladiators of Pergamon. He was appointed in the year 157 at the age of 28. For 4 years, he treated wounds that other doctors had never imagined, open to the muscle, sometimes to the bone, sometimes to the viscera. Galen called the wounds of gladiators windows into the body.
He could study the human anatomy in a way that most of his contemporaries could not. His care, he later boasted, reduced the death rate among his gladiators dramatically. Whether or not the numbers were precise, the experience taught him a kind of practical anatomy that would later inform all of his writing. There is a strange paradox at the heart of his career. The brutality of the arena provided the material for a medicine that would ease the suffering of countless ordinary people in later centuries. A gladiator's wound, closed carefully by a 28-year-old physician, became, over 1,000 years, a paragraph in a textbook, read by an unknown surgeon in medieval Spain. The connections between human pains are long and unexpected. Fact number 53.
Galen could not legally dissect human bodies. Roman law forbade it. So he dissected animals, especially Barbary apes, which he believed resembled humans closely enough. He performed public dissections, drew careful diagrams, and lectured on his findings. The Roman crowd watched, fascinated. The problem, of course, was that Barbary apes are not humans. Galen's anatomy therefore contained errors. He described a network of small blood vessels at the base of the brain, the rete mirabile, which exists in certain animals but not in humans. Generations of medical students would continue to draw the rete mirabile in textbooks for 1,000 years, until Vesalius, in the 16th century, finally insisted that it was not there. 1,000 years of error, based on a single confident teacher.
It is humbling to think about, but it is also a kind of comfort. It tells us that even great teachers can be wrong, and that eventually someone patient will look more carefully and correct them. The pursuit of truth is not a single triumph. It is a slow, forgiving correction. Fact number 54.
Galen developed a complex theory of the body's physiology, combining the four humors of Hippocrates with his own ideas about the three main organs. The liver, he said, made blood from food. The heart infused the blood with vital spirit. The brain refined it further into animal spirit, which traveled through the nerves. These three spirits drove every action of the body. The theory was wrong in detail, but brilliant in structure.
It gave physicians a unified model. For centuries, they could look at any symptom and ask, which organ, which spirit, which humor? The world of the body had a map, however inaccurate. A map that was wrong in places was still a map, and still better than no map at all. Medicine has always been, in part, a system of maps. Even today, our maps are incomplete. A patient's illness sits in a territory that has not yet been fully charted. Tonight, as you drift, the map of your own body is quietly redrawing itself. No physician needs to intervene. The long, slow work of sleep is enough. Fact number 55. Galen wrote more than 300 works, of which about 80 survive.
His prose is dense, exhaustive, and often combative. He argued with his contemporaries, with Hippocrates, with Aristotle, and, most frequently, with himself. He corrected his own earlier writings in his later ones. He collected commentaries on his own commentaries. After his death, in the early 3rd century, his collected works became the core of the medical curriculum in Byzantium, the Islamic world, and eventually in medieval Europe. He was known simply as Galenus, and to cite him was to cite the highest authority. The phrase Galenus dixit, Galen has said, ended many medical debates for more than a millennium. That is a vast, bewildering afterlife. One man's notes, steadily copied, steadily read, steadily believed. The quiet power of writing, and the quiet danger of it.
Every great authority eventually becomes a cage, which a later generation will have to open again. Fact number 56. Galen's pharmacology was elaborate. He prepared complex mixtures, some with dozens of ingredients, that he called theriacs. The most famous of these was Theriaca andromachi, originally developed in the 1st century by a physician named Andromachus for the Emperor Nero. Galen inherited the recipe, improved it, and spread it throughout the Roman world. Theriac contained opium, viper's flesh, cinnamon, myrrh, saffron, and many other ingredients. It was said to cure almost any illness, counteract any poison, and even prevent plague. Physicians prepared it in solemn rituals, sometimes public.
The ritual of compounding theriac continued in European pharmacies into the 18th century, long after the medicine itself had ceased to be taken seriously by educated doctors. It is easy to laugh at theriac. Much of it was nonsense. But some of it, such as the opium, was genuinely calming. And the careful ceremony of its preparation, the slow mixing, the years-long aging of the final paste, had its own psychological power. The patient believed. Sometimes, belief, supported by a little opium, was enough to ease the night. Fact number 57. Galen was a tireless believer in bloodletting. He prescribed it for nearly every illness, adjusting the site and the volume according to the patient's humoral balance.
He argued with Erasistratus, an earlier Greek physician who had doubted bloodletting and insisted that removing blood could relieve almost any excess. For the next 15 centuries, European medicine would follow him. Barbers, surgeons, and physicians opened veins in uncounted patients,
sometimes for relatively minor complaints. The result, we now know, was often to weaken the sick further. Some historians believe that bloodletting contributed to the deaths of George Washington and other historical figures. It is strange and sad to consider how many gentle people, acting in good faith, with the best authority of their time, caused quiet harm. But every age has its bloodletting. The cure of tomorrow will look at the cure of today and wince at some of it. That is the long, honest story of medicine.
We try, and sometimes in trying, we also wound. The best we can do is to keep looking more carefully. Fact number 58. Galen's ideas about the heart and lungs were partly correct and partly mistaken. He understood that the heart pumped blood and that the lungs took in air. He believed, however, that blood passed from one ventricle to the other through tiny pores in the septum, and that the air from the lungs was mixed directly into the blood as a kind of subtle steam. 1,500 years later, William Harvey would demonstrate that blood circulates in a continuous loop, pumped by the heart around the body, and that the septum has no such pores. But even Harvey was standing on Galen's shoulders.
Without Galen's flawed model, there would have been nothing to correct. Science moves forward on the back of careful errors. Inside you, right now, the blood is moving in the pattern that Harvey described and Galen missed. It is a slow, steady loop, repeating without haste. Billions of times it has already completed its circuit tonight. It will continue to do so for a long time. You do not need to supervise it. You are only a small guest in its vast patient labor. Fact number 59. Galen's medical texts were preserved by the Byzantine Greeks, translated into Syriac by Christian scholars, and then into Arabic during the early Islamic caliphates. By the 10th century, Arabic translations of Galen were more complete and more widely read than any Greek manuscript still existed. When Europe eventually rediscovered Galen in the 12th and 13th centuries, it largely did so through Latin versions translated from Arabic. Knowledge travels. Most of it travels in the dark, in the hands of unknown translators. A Syriac monk copying a Greek manuscript in a quiet monastery. An Arab scholar in Baghdad adjusting a difficult passage with a careful footnote. A Jewish physician in Toledo rendering the Arabic into Latin for a Spanish patron. Each of them a small stone in a long, careful bridge. You are on the other side of that bridge.
Every pill, every injection, every bandage in our own world has Galen somewhere in its ancestry. Passed down through languages you cannot read, the world of modern medicine is woven out of strangers' kindness. It is worth a small, quiet thank you tonight. Fact number 60. Galen died sometime around the year 200 of the Common Era, though the exact date is uncertain. He had outlived most of his rivals. He had written enough to fill a small library. He had treated emperors, senators, and countless ordinary patients. He left no great pupil behind. His legacy was entirely in his books. Those books survived him by more than 1,500 years, in continuous use. For a time, to study medicine in Europe was more or less to study Galen.
The Renaissance would eventually question him. The Enlightenment would dethrone him. But even his decline took centuries. It is a strange immortality to live on as a name in footnotes, as a voice behind other voices, as an authority that later readers either quote or correct. Most of us will not be remembered so long. It is all right.
The point is not to be remembered. The point is to have helped, even briefly, even imperfectly, the people who were here at the same time as you were. Everyone else, eventually, is asleep.
Fact number 61. In the 11th century of the Common Era, a Persian polymath named Ibn Sina, known in Europe as Avicenna, completed a medical encyclopedia called Al-Qanun fi al-Tib, the Canon of Medicine. It was finished around the year 1025. It would remain a primary reference in European universities for 600 years. Avicenna was born near Bukhara in 980. He was said to have memorized the Quran by the age of 10, mastered philosophy by the age of 16, and begun practicing medicine by the age of 18. He worked for princes, wrote on metaphysics, composed poetry, and in the intervals produced the Canon. It is a work of extraordinary synthesis, drawing on Greek, Persian, Indian, and Arabic sources.
It is humbling to imagine him writing it by candlelight, in the quiet hours of a Persian palace, surrounded by borrowed books. He did not know how long his work would last. He only knew that there was too much known about the body to let any of it slip away. So he wrote and wrote and wrote. He slept occasionally. The book remains. Fact number 62. The Canon of Medicine is organized in 5 books. The first covers general principles of medicine. The second describes simple drugs. The third and fourth cover diseases, organized by region of the body and by type. The fifth is a formulary, a list of complex preparations. Each section is carefully structured, allowing a physician to locate any topic with ease.
Avicenna's definitions of health, disease, diagnosis, and treatment would shape European medical education for centuries. His descriptions of contagion, of the role of water in spreading illness, and of mental disorders were far ahead of their time. He wrote about anxiety, melancholy, and insomnia with striking psychological subtlety. The physician, he insisted, must treat the soul as well as the body. When at last a Persian physician closed his inkpot, he probably sighed and rubbed his eyes. The long book was done, or at least one more chapter of it was done. A small candle burned low. Somewhere in the garden, a fountain whispered. He went to bed. 1,000 years later, his book is still teaching someone something. Fact number 63.
Avicenna's contemporary, Abu Bakr al-Razi, known in Europe as Rhazes, was another great physician of the Islamic Golden Age. He was born in the city of Ray, near modern Tehran, around the year 865. He was the chief physician of the hospital in Baghdad, one of the largest in the medieval world. Rhazes is said to have chosen the site of his hospital by hanging pieces of meat in different neighborhoods of Baghdad and building where the meat spoiled most slowly. He reasoned that the cleanest air would preserve the health of the patients best. It is one of the earliest documented examples of environmental medical thinking. Before germ theory, he was already reaching for the invisible quality of the air.
He wrote more than 200 books, including a detailed treatise on smallpox and measles that distinguished the two diseases for the first time in medical literature. He was, by all accounts, a kind man who treated rich and poor with equal care.
In the last years of his life, he lost his sight, reportedly from cataracts, and spent his evenings dictating his final texts to his students. The world grew dim around him. The books grew clearer. Fact number 64. Abu al-Qasim al-Zahrawi, known in Europe as Albucasis, was a physician and surgeon in Andalusia in the 10th century of the Common Era. He is best known for his 30-volume medical encyclopedia, the Kitab al-Tasrif, the Book of Concessions.
The last volume on surgery revolutionized European surgical practice for 500 years. Al-Zahrawi designed more than 200 surgical instruments, drew them carefully in his manuscripts, and described their use. Scalpels of many shapes, forceps, catheters, retractors, speculums, saws for amputation, hooks for childbirth. Each instrument is drawn with a calm, patient line. Each accompanies a paragraph describing the procedure, the patient's position, and the surgeon's best technique. Later, in European universities, his instruments were copied, adapted, and manufactured in iron and brass. They ended up on the dissection tables of Renaissance Italy and the operating theaters of Enlightenment France. A surgeon in Paris in the 17th century held in his hand an instrument descended in shape from one drawn by an Andalusian physician in the 10th century.
Medicine's tools have longer memories than we do. Fact number 65. The Bimaristans, the hospitals of the Islamic world, were among the most advanced institutions of their time. The word Bimaristan means house of the sick in Persian. The first great Bimaristan was founded in Baghdad in the 8th century. By the 12th century, similar hospitals stood in Damascus, Cairo, Cordoba, and dozens of other cities. They had separate wards for men and women, for different diseases, and in some cases for mental illness. They employed physicians, pharmacists, surgeons, and nurses. They kept careful records of patients. They gave meals, clothing, and upon discharge, a small sum of money so that the recovering patient did not have to return immediately to work.
Some Bimaristans maintained libraries and served as teaching hospitals. The modern hospital, with its wards, its pharmacy, its medical records, and its teaching function, has roots in these buildings. One can still visit the ruins of the Bimaristan al-Nuri in Damascus, built in the 12th century. The stones are silent, but the idea of the hospital as a place where strangers care for strangers is still quietly alive in them. Fact number 66. In the Islamic world, pharmacy became a formal profession, separate from medicine. Caliph al-Ma'mun, in the early 9th century, licensed the first apothecaries in Baghdad. The city soon had a long street lined with pharmacies, each carrying hundreds of drugs in labeled jars. Inspectors visited regularly to check the quality of the stock. Medieval Islamic pharmacists compounded elixirs, syrups, electuaries, plasters, and distilled waters. They wrote careful manuals, some of which listed more than 1,000 substances. They invented the rose water distillation methods that would later be used in European perfumery. They introduced sugar-based syrups for the administration of bitter drugs, easing the unpleasantness of many treatments. The modern pharmacy, with its rows of bottles and its careful labeling, inherited much from them. Inside every neighborhood drugstore today, you can see a faint reflection of that long Baghdadi street. The shelves are brighter now. The boxes are made of plastic. But the gesture of a pharmacist handing a small package across a counter with a quiet word of instruction is a gesture older than you may have guessed. Fact number 67.
Arabic medicine contributed the idea of clinical pharmacology testing. Al-Kindi, a 9th century philosopher and physician, wrote a work in which he proposed that the strength of a drug should be measured by the reaction of the patient. He outlined a method for scaling doses, considering the patient's constitution and the severity of the illness. It is one of the earliest examples of what we now call dose-response thinking. Al-Biruni, another great scholar of the 11th century, critiqued the dosing practices of his contemporaries and argued for careful, individualized adjustment. He stressed the importance of noting the purity of the drug, the age of the plant, and the season of its harvest. He wrote about pharmacy with the same precision he brought to astronomy.
Science has often advanced by taking small, ordinary practices seriously, writing down the dose, noting the season, measuring the outcome. These quiet habits, repeated for centuries, have saved many lives. They are the unglamorous engines of careful medicine. Fact number 68. The Islamic world also produced great ophthalmologists. Hunayn ibn Ishaq, a Christian physician in 9th century Baghdad, wrote a detailed book called the 10 Treatises on the Eye, which remained authoritative for centuries. It described cataract surgery, the use of the couching needle, and the careful post-operative care of the eye. He also supervised the translation of Galen into Arabic, directing a team of scribes that worked for decades.
The couching needle, a thin instrument used to push the cloudy lens aside and restore vision, was already described in ancient Indian texts. Islamic surgeons refined the technique, developed hollow needles capable of aspirating the cloudy material, and introduced new post-operative regimens. Many patients previously blind walked out of the clinic able to see again, however imperfectly. It is an extraordinary thing, the gift of sight. To enter a room sightless and leave it seeing is one of the ancient miracles that medicine has always tried to reproduce. Each time the operation succeeded, someone walked into the daylight again and wept. The crying was older than any text. The sight, given back, was brand new. Fact number 69.
Ibn al-Nafis, a 13th century Syrian physician, is credited with the first known description of the pulmonary circulation of the blood. Writing more than 3 centuries before William Harvey, he observed that blood must pass through the lungs to be refined, rather than leaking from the right to the left ventricle of the heart through invisible pores as Galen had taught. His insight was lost to Europe for centuries. Only in the 20th century did historians rediscover his writings and recognize his priority. He had looked carefully at the heart, argued against a long-held authority, and written down his conclusion in calm, steady prose. The world was not ready to hear him, so it filed him away and moved on. Then, 700 years later, someone opened the filing cabinet again.
Knowledge is often delivered late, sometimes centuries late, but eventually it arrives. The honest observer, patient enough to record what he has actually seen, is eventually vindicated. You too, in your own life, have probably observed something true that no one around you believed. Keep the notebook. Someone eventually will read it. Fact number 70. The physicians of the Islamic Golden Age understood themselves as part of a long, shared tradition. They cited Hippocrates, Galen, Aristotle, the Dioscorides, and a long line of Indian and Persian teachers. They did not feel the need to invent everything new. They took what was already good, corrected what was wrong, and added what they had learned themselves. Then they passed it on. This is, perhaps, the quiet genius of their age.
Not the drama of invention, but the patience of careful integration. translation, correction, expansion. A scholar sits in a library at dusk, reading an old text, marking it with a thin reed pen. He is doing nothing flashy. He is simply taking knowledge seriously enough to maintain it. Civilization, it turns out, is mostly maintenance. Your own body, tonight, is doing its maintenance too. Cells are being replaced. Memories are being sorted. The long work of repair is quietly in motion. You do not need to help. You only need to rest.
Fact number 71. In the early Middle Ages of Europe, as the Roman Empire receded and long centuries of disruption began, much classical medical knowledge was preserved by monks. Benedictine monasteries became, for several centuries, the main centers of healing for the surrounding countryside. Each larger monastery had a garden of medicinal herbs and a small infirmary. The rule of Saint Benedict, written in the 6th century, instructed monks to care for the sick as for Christ himself. Brothers with a talent for herbalism became the monastery's healers. They read what they could of Galen and Dioscorides, often in Latin summaries. They grew sage and rosemary, mint and wormwood, lavender and rue. They compounded tinctures, wrote down recipes, and shared their knowledge with neighbors who came to the gate.
A medieval peasant, ill with a winter fever, knocked at the door of such a monastery in the early morning. A quiet monk in a brown robe listened carefully, led him to the infirmary, and sat with him while a preparation was made. The Latin words spoken over him were half blessing, half prescription. The care, in any case, was real. Fact number 72. Hildegard of Bingen was a 12th century German abbess, a composer, a mystic, and a healer. She was born in the year 1098. As the head of a Benedictine convent on the Rhine, she wrote extensively on theology, music, natural history, and medicine. Her medical works, Physica and Causae Curae, are among the most complete surviving texts of medieval European herbalism.
Hildegard described hundreds of plants, animals, and minerals, along with their supposed healing properties. She wrote about depression, insomnia, women's health, and the role of joyful music in healing. She believed in a force she called viriditas, greening power, a kind of divine freshness that flows through all living things. When the viriditas of a person weakened, she said, illness followed. Whatever we may think of her theology, the word is beautiful. Greenness, the healing quality of a meadow in late spring. The smell of damp earth after rain. Tonight, in your mind, let a little greenness come back. Your own viriditas has been patient with you all day. It is about to rest and grow. Fact number 73. The medieval herbal tradition produced beautiful illustrated manuscripts.
One of the most famous, the Leech Book of Bald, was compiled in 9th century England. Its name comes from the Anglo-Saxon word lese, meaning healer or physician. It contains recipes for everything, from headaches to demonic possession to wolf bites. In 2015, a team at the University of Nottingham recreated one of Bald's eye salves, a recipe for sty, using garlic, onion, wine, and ox gall mixed according to the original instructions. In the laboratory, the preparation killed a remarkable proportion of Staphylococcus aureus, including resistant strains. A 1,000-year-old recipe, aged in its brass vessel for 9 nights as Bald prescribed, had unexpected antimicrobial power.
An Anglo-Saxon healer in a smoky hut, crushing garlic and onion by candlelight,
was doing something more interesting than anyone in a 21st century laboratory would have predicted. Old recipes sometimes hold old truths, patiently waiting to be recognized. Fact number 74. The word drug comes from the Old French drogue, which may derive from a Middle Low German word drug, meaning dry goods, a reference to dried herbs. The medieval pharmacist world was largely a world of dried plants. Bundles hung from ceiling beams. Jars lined the shelves. Each one had a label in careful Latin, written by a younger apprentice years ago, and still legible.
A customer entered, described her ailment, and waited while the pharmacist took down 1 or 2 bundles, crushed the leaves in a mortar, measured a pinch onto a folded paper, and handed it across the counter. She paid in small coins, or in eggs, or in a promise of bread later in the week. She walked home with the small paper packet tucked inside her cloak, feeling already a little better, because at least something was being done. Most medicine through most of history has looked like this. A quiet shop, a careful exchange, a small paper packet. Even now, the modern pharmacy, with its bright lights and its electronic registers, is a direct descendant of that shop. The shelves have changed. The relationship has not. Fact number 75. In the 11th century, the town of Salerno in southern Italy became the site of what is often called the first medieval medical school in Europe. It was known as the Schola Medica Salernitana. Students studied Greek and Arabic texts translated into Latin. Women studied alongside men. The school was open to Jews, Christians, and Muslims. The school produced a famous little verse manual called the Regimen Sanitatis Salernitanum, a Latin poem of health advice. It counseled moderation in diet, regular exercise, temperance in wine, and the cultivation of a cheerful mind. It was translated into many languages, memorized by generations of students, and recited across Europe for centuries. A version of it is still printed from time to time, usually without its readers knowing its age.
There is a small, enduring wisdom in it. Eat lightly at dinner. Walk after meals. Go to bed at a reasonable hour. Laugh, if you can, at least a little each day. None of these instructions is new. None of them will ever be new. They are simply the slow, repeating counsel of human life, offered again by a medieval hand. Fact number 76. Medieval European medicine was intimately tied to astrology. Physicians consulted star charts to choose the best day for bleeding, for administering a particular drug, or for performing a surgery. The zodiac man, a diagram showing which sign of the zodiac governed which part of the body, appeared in countless medical manuscripts. It is easy, from our distance, to dismiss this.
But it reveals an underlying intuition. The body was not separate from the cosmos. The tides of the moon, the hours of the night, the turning of the seasons, all mattered. A healing action timed with the rhythm of nature, the physicians believed, would flow with a greater current than one performed at random. Modern medicine has begun, in its own terms, to agree. Chronobiology, the study of the body's internal clocks, is a young but serious field. Some drugs work better at certain times of day. Surgeries have different recovery rates depending on the circadian phase. The stars themselves do not direct the body, but the rhythms to which the old doctors paid attention turn out to be real. The cosmos and the body are, after all, not strangers.
Fact number 77. The medieval world had a very particular relationship with plague. The Black Death, arriving in Europe in the 14th century, killed perhaps a third of the continent's population in a few years. Physicians, clergy, and ordinary people struggled to understand. The treatments were various and mostly ineffective. Theriac, bloodletting, prayer, flight. Some cities burned Jewish communities in horrific witch hunts, believing them the cause. One of the more striking images from the later plague years is that of the plague doctor, in his long dark robe and a beak-shaped mask stuffed with aromatic herbs. The mask, developed in the 17th century, was based on the theory of miasma, that bad air carried the disease.
The herbs in the beak, sometimes including mint, rose petals, lavender, and camphor, were meant to purify the inhaled air. The theory was wrong. The disease was carried by fleas, not by air alone. But the image has stayed with us, a dark silhouette in the smoky alleys of a dying city, a figure of human inadequacy confronting a vast sorrow with the only tools it had. The doctor moved through the night, doing what little he could. The night, at least, accepted him. Fact number 78. The medieval pharmacopoeia was also full of strange, sometimes horrifying ingredients. Mummy powder, ground from actual ancient Egyptian mummies, was sold in European pharmacies from the 12th century through the 18th. It was prescribed for bruises, wounds, and internal ailments.
At one point, the demand was so great that unscrupulous suppliers began using the dried corpses of criminals or famine victims and passing them off as authentic mummy. It is difficult to consider this without a shudder. But it is a lesson in how desperate medicine can become when it lacks effective options. When nothing works, people will try almost anything, especially if a learned authority endorses it. The demand for cures is older than the understanding of disease. We have not entirely escaped this pattern. The modern world still hosts its share of unproven remedies, sold at high prices to frightened patients. The mummy powder jars on modern shelves have different labels, but the jars themselves are not very new. Human fear is very old. Fact number 79.
Alongside such oddities, medieval herbals also preserved truly effective plants. Foxglove, Digitalis purpurea, appears in medieval English herbals as a remedy for dropsy, which we now call congestive heart failure. William Withering, an 18th century English physician, formalized the use of foxglove into the extract digitalis, which became a mainstay of cardiac medicine. Modern heart patients still take derivatives of it. The path from a hedgerow plant to a modern cardiac tablet is long. It passes through countless patients, through trial and error, through records carefully kept by unknown practitioners. A medieval herbwoman gathered foxglove in the early summer, hung it to dry in her kitchen, and later made a cautious infusion for a swollen-legged villager. Some of her patients died from the wrong dose. Some were restored.
The plant was learned slowly over generations. The herbwoman is not in any textbook. Her name is not in any directory. But she is indirectly part of the line that leads to the modern cardiac ward. All those quiet medieval afternoons in a kitchen garden have added up to something that still keeps hearts beating today. Fact number 80. The medieval tradition of herbal medicine did not end with the Renaissance. It went underground into the practices of rural healers, midwives, and cunning folk. In England, in France, in Germany, in Scandinavia, these informal practitioners continued to use older recipes well into the 19th century. Some of their knowledge was eventually recorded by folklorists. Some of it disappeared entirely.
A village midwife in 17th century Scotland might know 30 plants by sight and touch. She might know which ones to use for a difficult birth, for a cough, for a sore nipple, for a colicky baby. She might not be able to read. She might be distrusted by the local pastor. She might die in an ordinary winter, with no monument and no written testimony. But the lives she saved did not ask for documentation. Most of medical history has been written by the literate. Most of medical history has actually been practiced by the unwritten. It is worth now and then nodding to them. The unknown healer, in the quiet cottage, with a rough wooden chest of dried leaves, has held a very large share of humanity's nights.
Fact number 81. In the ancient Mediterranean, a plant called silphium grew almost exclusively around the city of Cyrene, in what is now eastern Libya. It was, according to Greek and Roman sources, one of the most valuable substances in the ancient world. Its resin was used as a spice, as a perfume, and crucially, as a contraceptive. Pliny the Elder wrote that silphium was worth its weight in silver. Julius Caesar kept a large stock of it in the treasury of Rome. Ancient coins from Cyrene depict the plant on one side, so proudly that the city's whole economy seems to have rested on it.
By the 1st century of the Common Era, however, silphium had become so rare that Pliny reports only a single surviving stalk being presented, as a curiosity, to the Emperor Nero. By the end of antiquity, silphium was extinct. It had been over-harvested, over-grazed, and over-demanded. Exactly what species it was we no longer know. An entire plant, once central to a civilization's sense of well-being, vanished. The botanical shape of it is preserved only on coins and in a few scattered drawings. Some things once lost are truly lost. Fact number 82. Kaifi was a sacred Egyptian incense, compounded from some 16 ingredients, including honey, raisins, wine, myrrh, mastic, pine resin, cassia, juniper, and cypress.
It was burned in temples in the evening as part of the sun's return to the underworld, and was said to soothe anxiety, promote sleep, and sweeten dreams. Recipes for kaifi survive in ancient Greek and Roman texts, quoting older Egyptian sources. Several modern perfumers have tried to reconstruct it. The resulting aroma is warm, resinous, faintly sweet, with a slow burn. It fills the room without overwhelming it. Those who experience it often report a soft, almost dreamlike quality, as though the evening itself had been translated into smell. Somewhere, tonight, someone is lighting a reconstructed bit of kaifi in a quiet apartment. The smell rises in a thin thread. The apartment, without quite meaning to, becomes for a moment an ancient temple. Time folds.
Nothing is quite changed. You too can, in imagination, be in that room. Fact number 83. The Romans used a medicinal compound called Mithridatium, said to have been invented by Mithridates VI, king of Pontus, in the 1st century before the Common Era. Mithridates, fearing assassination by poison, supposedly dosed himself daily with a complex antidote containing 54 ingredients. He built up such a tolerance, the legends say, that when he finally tried to kill himself with poison, he could not. He had to ask a soldier to run him through with a sword. Mithridatium was manufactured in Rome for centuries as a general antidote and cure-all. It was later supplanted by Galen's theriac, which borrowed its structure.
The recipe varied over the years, but the central idea, a single mixture that protected against all poisons, persisted as a comforting myth for more than 1,000 years. There is a sad, human logic at the heart of it. The fear of being poisoned is very old. the wish for a single drink that would make us safe, forever, from every danger, is also very old. Medicine, at its wildest, is often an attempt to buy peace from the one thing we cannot buy peace from, which is mortality. The wish itself is innocent. Fact number 84. In the early Middle Ages, a Byzantine physician compiled a huge medical text called the Iatrosophion. It was a kind of general reference, copied and recopied in Greek monasteries for centuries.
Many of its recipes are now unintelligible, referencing plants or minerals whose names have drifted out of use. Some of its remedies are clearly absurd, blending superstition and observation in equal measure. Others, tested by modern researchers, have shown surprising pharmacological power. One such remedy, a compound ointment for burns, contains ingredients that, taken together, reduce inflammation and promote healing. It is impossible to say how much truth lies buried in the still untranslated pages of such manuscripts. Libraries across the Mediterranean and the Middle East hold thousands of old medical texts that have never been carefully studied. The past is not only behind us, it is also waiting, quietly, in boxes and shelves, to be read again. Fact number 85.
The ancient Persians used a drug called bang, derived from cannabis, for various medical purposes. It was administered for pain, for insomnia, for appetite loss, and for certain forms of anxiety. Descriptions of its preparation appear in Persian medical texts from the 9th century onward, sometimes blended into a confection with honey, spices, and nuts. In moderate doses, the preparation made patients relaxed, a little sleepy, gently unwilling to worry. In larger doses, it was used as a surgical sedative. Islamic physicians were divided on its use. Some considered it useful. Others considered it morally dangerous. The debate has continued, in different vocabularies, to the present day. The story of a plant's place in medicine is rarely a simple one.
It passes through the hands of healers, patients, clerics, and lawmakers, and each group sees a different substance. The plant itself is unchanged. Only the human frame around it shifts. Fact number 86. Ancient Chinese texts mention a substance called jisi, a dye, and medicine derived from the gardenia fruit. It was used to color cloth yellow and to treat liver ailments. It was Meller-19, and modern studies, the active compound of jisi, geniposide, has been shown to have genuine hepatoprotective effects in animal models. A person walking through a garden in 10th century Hangzhou might have smelled the...
Plants often lead two lives. One is decoration, and one is medicine. And the two lives quietly cross in a garden. Tonight, picture such a garden. Low moonlight on white blossoms. The soft rustle of bamboo. A single yellow-dyed robe drying on a wooden rack. The physician, having finished his day's work, walks through the garden without thinking about medicine. He is simply tired. The gardenias watch him pass, silent as the stars. Fact number 87. In Mesoamerica, long before contact with Europe, the Aztecs maintained botanical gardens attached to their medical schools. The gardens were used for research, for teaching, and for the care of rulers.
A physician training in Tenochtitlan might walk each day through rows of neatly labeled plants, learning the use of each one by sight, touch, and taste. The Aztecs used hundreds of medicinal plants, many still in use today. Chili for digestion, vanilla as a tonic, copal as a disinfectant. The Codex Badianus, compiled by an Aztec physician in 1552, records more than 240 plants with medical uses. It is the oldest surviving herbal from the Americas, and it stands alongside the Egyptian and Chinese classics as evidence that careful plant medicine arose wherever humans settled down and watched the ground. Civilizations often develop more similarities than they know.
The teenage apprentice in Tenochtitlan, memorizing plant names, was in the same gentle occupation as his counterparts in Baghdad or Nara. Humans, whenever they stay in one place long enough, begin to know the plants. Fact number 88. A mysterious medical manuscript dated by carbon analysis to the early 15th century contains drawings of plants that no botanist has ever positively identified. Its text is written in an unknown script. Cryptographers have tried for more than a century to decipher it, without success. Some scholars believe that it is an elaborate hoax. Others believe that it is an earnest medical treatise in a language now lost.
Whatever the truth, the manuscript is a striking reminder that not all the medicine of the past has been successfully translated. Some of it is still sealed in beautiful, incomprehensible paragraphs on old vellum in a library at Yale. Somewhere in the drawings are herbs with feathered leaves and strange spiraling roots, attended by tiny figures bathing in green water. What they are or were, we cannot say. Sometimes the past offers us a sealed letter. The most honest response is to admit that we do not know. We do not need to know everything. The sealed letter itself is a reminder of patience. Fact number 89. The ancient Greeks and Romans used a plant called hellebore for mental illness. Two main species were recognized.
White hellebore, Veratrum album, was prescribed for melancholia, mania, and seizures. Black hellebore, Helleborus niger, was associated with more moderate nervous disorders. The plants were dangerous. Their alkaloids could be fatal at the wrong dose. Despite the risk, hellebore remained a central drug in the treatment of mental illness for more than 1,000 years. Galen wrote carefully about its use. Medieval physicians warned patients to make their wills before the treatment. Some doctors specialized in hellebore, traveling from town to town, dosing patients in careful gradations, and sleeping beside them at night in case their breathing became too slow. Mental illness is one of the oldest and most persistent of human sufferings. We still struggle with it. Hellebore was not the answer.
Modern psychiatry is only part of the answer. But the attempt to help, generation after generation, is itself a kind of answer. The unseen work of attending to a troubled mind is older than any drug. Fact number 90. Some of the most remarkable lost remedies were never written down at all. Each oral tradition, each grandmother's kitchen, each shaman's apprentice carried practical knowledge that vanished when the last person who remembered it died. Anthropologists who arrived late in isolated communities sometimes recorded the names of useful plants just before the final speakers of a language passed away. The human world is a vast, ongoing library of knowledge, much of which has no shelf.
Every year,
Entire chapters of this library close, not because the knowledge was wrong, but simply because no one was trained to hold it. The work of ethnobotany, of language preservation, of respectful listening to elders, is a quiet race against this slow forgetting. The little bundle of herbs on an old woman's windowsill, the song she hums as she crushes the leaves, the advice she gave to a daughter who did not have time to write it down. Countless such bundles have vanished. Some remain. They are not less precious for being small. In a sense, they are the truest medicine humanity ever had.
Fact number 91. The story of willow bark is one of the clearest examples of an ancient remedy that has quietly survived, transformed into modern medicine. The Egyptians used it, the Sumerians used it, the Greeks used it. Dioscorides, the first-century Greek physician, described it for joint pain. Medieval European healers continued to recommend it. In the 19th century, European chemists isolated salicin, then salicylic acid, and then, in 1897, the chemist Felix Hoffmann at the Bayer Company synthesized acetylsalicylic acid. It was gentler on the stomach than the raw bark extract. Bayer named it aspirin and marketed it as a pain reliever. The pill in the white bottle on a modern shelf is a direct descendant of the willow tree in the Nile Valley.
The chain is unbroken. Tonight, perhaps somewhere in your house there is a small bottle of aspirin. If so, it is a quiet fossil, carrying inside it a molecule that Egyptian laborers tasted, that medieval monks brewed, that Victorian chemists purified, and that your grandmother kept in her medicine cabinet. It is a very small history of the world. Fact number 92. Honey, as we have already said, was used by the Egyptians as a wound dressing. It has continued to be used quietly in every century since. Modern medicinal honey, specifically processed and sterilized, is now a standard item in many wound clinics, particularly for diabetic ulcers, burns, and injuries that have failed to heal with other treatments. The mechanisms are well understood.
Honey's low water activity pulls moisture out of bacterial cells. Its pH is slightly acidic. It releases small amounts of hydrogen peroxide as a natural enzyme acts on its sugars. It also creates a moist healing environment that encourages the regrowth of skin tissue. All of this, of course, was unknown to the scribe who first wrote the recipe on papyrus. He only knew that it worked. The bees do not know either. They are simply concentrating the nectar of flowers into a thick, sweet, preserving liquid. In doing so, almost incidentally, they have produced one of the oldest and most durable medicines in the world. Everything that heals us, if we trace it back far enough, is a gift of something that was simply living its own life.
Tonight, you too are simply living your own life. That is more than enough. Fact number 93. Opium is another ancient remedy that survived into modern medicine. The Sumerians called the poppy the joy plant. The Greeks dedicated it to Hypnos, the god of sleep. The Romans used opium to ease pain and to calm restless children. In the 12th century, Ibn Sina wrote about it carefully, with an awareness of both its benefits and its dangers. In the early 19th century, a German pharmacist named Friedrich Serturner isolated the main active alkaloid of opium and named it morphine, after Morpheus, the Greek god of dreams. Morphine and its derivatives have since become the basis of modern pain medicine.
They have also, tragically, been the cause of vast human suffering through addiction. The poppy, like many ancient friends, remains a complicated one. A garden full of red and purple poppies, swaying in a summer wind, is one of the most peaceful images the world offers. Inside those blossoms is a molecule that has eased the pain of dying people for 4,000 years and has also destroyed lives. The world is very rarely simple. The poppy itself is beautiful and innocent. The choices humans make around it are older than any of us. Fact number 94. In the 1970s, a Chinese researcher named Tu Yu was asked to join a secret government project to find a new treatment for malaria.
The disease was killing large numbers of soldiers and civilians in Vietnam. Existing drugs were losing their effectiveness as the parasite developed resistance. Tu Yu turned to ancient Chinese medical texts, hoping to find a forgotten remedy. In a 4th century text by the physician Ji Hong, she read a recipe for fever that used sweet wormwood, Artemisia annua. The text instructed the preparer to soak the herb in cold water rather than boiling it. This subtle detail about the temperature of the water turned out to be crucial. It allowed Tu Yu's team to extract the heat-sensitive compound artemisinin, which is now the cornerstone of malaria treatment worldwide. In 2015, Tu Yu received the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine. She was 79 years old.
She had read a 1,600-year-old instruction and listened to it carefully. Countless lives have been saved as a result. Ancient medicine and modern medicine, at their best, are not enemies. They are careful colleagues across time. Fact number 95. The Indian plant Rovolfia serpentina was used in Ayurveda for more than 2,000 years as a sedative and a treatment for certain forms of mental distress. Mahatma Gandhi is said to have used it for insomnia. In the 1950s, Swiss pharmaceutical researchers isolated from it a compound called reserpine, which became one of the first effective drugs for high blood pressure and for schizophrenia. Reserpine is used less today, having been replaced by more refined drugs with fewer side effects.
But its discovery opened the modern study of neurochemistry. By noticing how reserpine reduced the brain's levels of certain neurotransmitters, scientists began to understand that mental states had biochemical underpinnings. Ayurveda's quiet little root, used for millennia to calm troubled minds, helped launch modern psychopharmacology. A plant, growing unobtrusively in the shade of an Indian forest, carried within its roots a piece of knowledge that would one day help people sleep in Stockholm, Moscow, and Buenos Aires. The forest did not know. It only grew. The forest's patience, again and again, has paid us in ways we did not expect. Fact number 96. The foxglove, as we have already noted, contains digitalis, a compound used to treat congestive heart failure.
Modern cardiology still uses purified digitalis derivatives, along with newer medications. The dosage is now tightly calibrated. The side effects are monitored. But the molecule in the pill descends directly from the plant that an 18th century English gardener might have grown, without any idea of its significance, in a sunny border of her cottage garden. William Withering, the physician who brought foxglove into formal medicine, reportedly learned of its use from an old woman in Shropshire who had inherited a family recipe for dropsy. He bought the recipe from her for a small sum, tested it carefully on his patients, and in 1785 published a book called An Account of the Foxglove. The book credited the old woman for the lead.
Modern medicine has not always been so gracious, but at least sometimes. In the story of a cure, the name of the village grandmother survives. All the unnamed village grandmothers tonight are asleep somewhere in the long meadow of history. They do not ask to be thanked. They would, however, nod their heads a little
if they knew the foxglove in their borders had eventually crossed the sea. Fact number 97.
It was the first truly effective treatment for malaria, and its active compound quinine saved an incalculable number of lives over the next 3 centuries. Without quinine, colonial expansion into tropical regions would have been vastly more difficult. Whole empires rose and fell partly on the availability of this plant. During the Second World War, the cutting off of cinchona supplies from occupied Indonesia drove a frantic search for synthetic substitutes, resulting in the development of modern antimalarial drugs. A tree in the Andes, an indigenous healer who noticed that a bitter tea eased a fever, a Jesuit who listened, rather than dismissing, a Spanish queen who was cured, a chain of global consequences that is still unspooling today. Medicine is a long, cross-cultural handshake. Most of it is forgotten.
But the body, and the tree, and the river, and the priest, and the patient are all still here. Fact number 98. Vaccination is, in a sense, the most dramatic survival of an ancient medical idea. For centuries, in China, India, Turkey, and parts of Africa, people practiced variolation, a procedure in which material from mild cases of smallpox was introduced into the bodies of healthy people, in the hope of inducing a protective illness. The technique was dangerous, but often effective. In the 18th century, Lady Mary Wortley Montagu brought variolation from Ottoman Turkey to England. Later, Edward Jenner adapted the practice by using cowpox instead, a milder illness that protected against the deadlier one.
The word vaccination comes from vacca, the Latin for cow in honor of Jenner's breakthrough. Modern vaccines are direct descendants, in principle, of a practice that may have begun centuries earlier among healers whose names are not recorded. A Turkish nurse, pricking the arm of a small child in the 18th century, was carrying a technique that had traveled, by unseen paths, from older practitioners in Asia and Africa. Her hand was part of a line that now includes every vaccine clinic in the world. Some of the most powerful medicine we have was built, patient hand by patient hand, long before microbiology existed. Fact number 99. Ancient medicine also left us an intangible inheritance.
The idea of the hospital, the vocation of the healer, the oath of the physician, the dignity of the patient. None of these were invented last year. They were assembled gradually, by thousands of unnamed people over thousands of years. Each contributed a little. Most died without knowing what they had passed forward. We sometimes speak of modern medicine as though it began with antibiotics, or with X-rays, or with some other 20th century triumph. But the truth is far older and stranger. Every nurse who adjusts a pillow, every doctor who explains a diagnosis in gentle words, every pharmacist who writes out instructions clearly so that an elderly patient will not be confused, is continuing a very long work. The ancients, if they could see it, would recognize themselves.
Tonight, while you drift, the night shift at some hospital is quietly in motion. Someone is bending over a sleeping patient, listening to the pulse. Someone is labeling a medication. Someone is changing a bandage with calm, attentive hands. They do not know they are part of a story 4,000 years old, but they are. You are safely inside that story too. Fact number 100. At the end of all these remedies, all these physicians, all these plants, all these centuries, one simple truth remains. Most of what has ever been done in medicine has been done in the dark by unknown people, with imperfect knowledge, out of a stubborn wish to help. Some of them were priests, some were scholars, some were grandmothers.
Some were monks in quiet gardens, some were emperors, and some were slaves. What they shared was the willingness to try, to mix the paste, to apply the honey, to boil the bark, to chant the quiet prayer. They did not have our instruments or our data, but they had their hands and their attention, and their small rooms lit by oil lamps, and their long patience with other people's suffering. They saved lives they could not imagine, and lost lives they did not know how to save, and they went to sleep each night, eventually, in rooms much like the one you are in now. Tonight, let all of them rest with you. The scribe of the Ebers Papyrus, the Babylonian diviner with his clay liver,
the Chinese herbalist with his jade bowl, the Sushrutan surgeon with his bronze scalpel, the Hippocratic student on a warm hillside, the Roman compounder with his jar of theriac, the Baghdadi pharmacist closing his shop at dusk, the Benedictine monk weeding his herb bed, the village grandmother drying foxglove, the Quechua healer at the edge of the cloud forest, the Turkish nurse with her small needle, the modern doctor you may or may not remember by name. Each of them did the best they could. Each of them, one way or another, handed forward the small, warm candle of care. It arrived at last, in your own life, in the form of the room where you are now resting, the medicines within reach, the breath slowing in your chest.
The long story of medicine is, in the end, a very simple one. People tried to help. People are still trying. Tonight you do not need to help anyone. Tonight you need only be gently, thoroughly, completely at rest. Total, 2,112 words, 100 facts.